Hello everybody and welcome to another Grizzly tale or two. Alan Robson with you. Thank you for your company. And let us dive into a strange world to start with. We always begin with something a bit quirky and peculiar. This time it's slips of the tongue. Now, having worked on radio for over 40 years, I've done it on many an occasion. Sometimes said something very rude that I knew was rude, but pretended it wasn't rude so that if anybody said that's rude, you could get away with it. On many other occasions, I've just quite simply said the wrong thing. And it's easily done. And I've got a few absolute howlers to share with you. The first one comes from the Duke of Edinburgh, who has, frankly, opened his mouth a bit much and put his foot in it far too often. On this case, he was addressing conservationists because he was going out hunting. And he said, "The grouse are in absolutely no danger from people who shoot grouse." Yeah. Also, during a cricket match, Michael Holding was on one side, the bowler was Peter Willey, and BBC cricket commentator said, "The batsman's Holding, the bowler's Willey." Brilliant. You can't make it up. Johnny Carson on his American TV show once said, "And after the break, a wildlife expert will show you..." Well, after that, you see how easy it is? I quite like this one. Johnny Carson on his American TV show. "After the break, a wildlife expert will show you a horny owl." Brilliant. Then Alan Freeman, who was a presenter that I loved with a passion, he said, "And there he is, reigning supreme at number 2 during his chart rundown." Quite often when you're doing something that's live, you don't really have too much time to think, and that's proven time and time again. During Match of the Day's winding down just towards the end of the show, Jimmy Hill once said, "Good night, and don't forget to put your cocks back." Classic. BBC Radio, of course, during World War II, had to keep the British public abridged of whatever was going on. And a whole load of German tanks had been destroyed, Panzers they were. And the BBC radio presenter, terribly plummy voice, said, "Allied troops have halted the advance of Hitler's Panzer Division." Classics, every one. Let's take a look at Radio 4. There was a breakdown in transmission. Now, this could happen to any radio station anywhere, where you just go off air and it needs to be repaired and fixed, and it comes back on. But to have the gall to say this, I think is pretty classy. The Radio 4 announcer said, "We hope the 20-minute break in transmission didn't spoil your enjoyment of 30-minute theatre." Then, of course, television reporter in Belfast talking about somebody who'd been sent to prison for 900 years. Well, of course, he won't serve the 900 years to which he's been sentenced, because the system here in Northern Ireland allows for up to 50% remission for good behaviour, which means he's going to get out after 450 years. Love this. An announcer on a Californian radio station, KUTY, he said, the city sheriff was kept busy with 3 burglars burglars. And sometimes once you start a trip, you keep tripping. Then David Duncan from another radio station in America, WLKW. From flood headquarters at City Hall, the mayor has ordered all families living Mill River to ejaculate immediately. Oh dear. I hope they didn't. Mike Smith used to be on Radio 1, and this is one of his classics. "It's all Beatles music from noon until midday." Yes, I'm still scratching about that one. Also, Simon Groom was a Blue Peter presenter. As he was leaving the show, he said, "Next week, we'll be looking at Blind Dogs for the Guide." One of the all-time classics, you will probably already know this. During a TV filming of Fanny and Johnny Craddock's cookery show, Frank Boff was the presenter, and she was making donuts. And at the end of the show, Frank Boff said, "Let's hope all of your donuts come out as Fanny's." It's old, but it's solid gold. BBC Radio 2 had a presenter called Don Durbridge, and he was a news reporter covering the Franco-free Spain. And he said, "There are 38 million Spaniards experiencing their first erection for 40 years. Should have been election, of course. Don't know what he was thinking about at the time. How about Star Trek? Captain Kirk. Yeah, James T. Kirk. He said on one of the shows, "Millions of people who have never died before will be killed." And it was left in. Unbelievable. Harry Carpenter, another TV commentator. "We haven't had any more rain since it stopped raining." Yeah. And a US local radio announcer in Texas said this. "This is Radio KTIW. Texas City. Texas City." It seems to be those doubles that lead to double entendres. And Bobby Robson, one of ours, he said, "I think long and short balls is probably what football's all about." Can't argue with that, Bob. Now, Peter West was talking about the lineup for Wimbledon this year. And he said, "Jimmy Connor's wife is expecting a baby, and there was some doubt about his entry." President Carter, oh my goodness, an American television newsreader covering a personal problem of Jimmy Carter's. President Carter has been suffering from hemorrhoids and is currently being treated by his physician, William Lukash. I know it does seem to be disc jockeys a lot. Steve Wright said, "This is the greatest record of all time for me at the moment." Peter Beardsley, England footballer, said, "We could have taken the lead before we even scored." And so it goes. Tony Blackburn, there has to be a one from Tor. "It's a shame that anybody who didn't turn up wasn't there." And let's finish with a bit of a classic, shall we? And this one is a TV documentary on Charles de Gaulle, the French leader. So the interviewer goes into the street with his trusty microphone and sees a lady who had just left the funeral, and it was, in fact, Madame de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle's wife. And he said, "What do you desire most now that your husband Charles has died, Madame de Gaulle?" And Madame de Gaulle says, "A penis." And the interviewer goes, "A penis?" And Madame de Gaulle replied, "Oui, a lifetime of happiness." You gotta be careful. With every sentence, there could be a howler just waiting to leap out. So, let us get into all things Grizzly. We're starting off with a short story, and then we're covering all kinds of weird things, ending with a Wild Western hero. Now, tonight, we're telling you a story that happened at Cresswell in the north of England. Cresswell is near a place called Druridge Bay, one of the most picturesque landscapes on the northeast coast, and near there stands the Peel Tower. For many years, the only lifeline that the local villagers had. Not only had it been used to summon worshippers to prayer, it also warned them when the Vikings were set to raid. This area of beach was the perfect place to land. They could bring their longships close enough to the shore for them to walk in. Some say as many as 5,000 raids began at Druridge. It came as no surprise that over the years some Norsemen decided to stay, building homes for themselves and their families. And one such man was actually a Danish prince, who so fell in love with the place he ordered his Vikings to stop their raids, pushing them either further north around Berwick or south to the mouth of the Tyne. And this pleased the locals, who befriended the prince, and soon all animosity had disappeared, with the exception of the family who lived at Cresswell Tower. They had lost 3 sons in vicious and bloody battles with the Danes, and they refused to accept one into their community. And yet the Danish prince, ironically, was a peace-loving man, and never having taken up arms against the Britons, he didn't believe he had anything to fear, and his only mistake was to fall in love with a pretty Northumbrian girl, the youngest daughter of the family who lived in Cresswell Tower. And she felt the same towards him, even though she knew that hatred for the prince festered throughout her brothers and cousins. But after a decent time of courtship, the prince approached the family to ask for her hand in marriage, and to everyone's surprise, they agreed. They negotiated a suitable dowry, and the prince left the tower cheering and singing. Such was his joy. He invited every single man, woman and child to the wedding to be held at Cresswell Tower. He prepared his entourage and forwarded cartloads of food, freshly killed deer, boar and cattle. There had never been a happier man. He had left the warlike Vikings to settle in a peaceful land and was about to marry the most beautiful woman he had ever known. His fiancée was very Scandinavian in appearance, with long plaited blonde hair. So the great day arrived, and the prince, with an escort of 4 men, began to ride down the coast towards Cresswell. At the tower, hundreds of people were gathered awaiting the groom's arrival. The bride-to-be was stunned at how little resistance to her marriage she had received, from her brothers especially, who detested the prince. She took her place high up at the top of the peel tower, scanning the horizon for any sign of the man who was set to share the rest of her life. However, her brothers were a cunning pair, and they had employed 3 Scots to murder the prince on the way to the ceremony. They were barely half a mile from Cresswell when arrows flew into the chests of 2 of the escort. The others were so surprised they were easily pulled from their horses by the Scottish attackers. The prince could easily have escaped had he left his men. Instead, he drew his sword and proceeded to attack. He never saw the man who killed him, for as he raised his sword to do battle with one Scot, his clansman had pushed the head of a spear into his back, forcing the point upwards, piercing his heart. The prince swayed in his saddle as the horse began to gallop off towards Cresswell. The crowds all cheered as they saw the prince galloping towards them. His bride gave a smile as bright as a Mediterranean sunrise, and all would surely be well. Yet as the prince approached, his blood-soaked body slipped from the horse, his foot remaining entangled in the stirrup. The wedding party gasped as he began bouncing off rocks and greenery alike as the horse dragged him right past the tower. Eventually, some of the guests managed to stop the horse and found that the prince was dead. As the news was shouted up to that faded woman on the peel tower, she looked as white as her pearl-laden gown. Whether she fainted or whether it was by choice, we will never know. But she fell from the tower to her own death, landing between her 2 brothers. Not only had they murdered a good man who would have been a good, decent and honourable husband, they had killed their own sister too. The bride that would never be is said to haunt Cresswell Tower, and on a few occasions has reenacted the moment she fell, much to the surprise of visitors. Sounds of agony can often be heard from the nearby dunes, and this is always followed by the pounding of horses' hooves, dragging something large, something bulky through the brush. Miss D.D. Knight from Penrith in Cumbria wrote to me in August 1985. She said, "You should visit Cresswell, because I am positive I saw a ghost there last summer. We were having a beach barbecue at about 11 p.m. at night when my boyfriend and I went for a walk. We were standing beneath the tower when we looked up and saw a lady dressed all in white. She was so clear we could make out all of her facial features, even in the moonlight. I actually shouted up to apologize if we'd woken her up. We were playing music on the beach and having a bit of a dance. She didn't answer. She just looked really sad. Then she turned and walked away. She was wearing a long white dress." So let's move on to the whole world. Tonight I'm talking about relics, pieces of human beings that various religions, but particularly the Christians, revere. Because there's over 17,900 churches around the world that claim to have part of the cross that bore Jesus. Now, if that is true, the cross would extend from Earth almost to the moon. Recently, a bit of wood that somebody claims came from Jesus' crib, yet they refuse point blank to have the wood dated. Instead, they blindly believe it's not from B&Q. Relics used to be the only physical remains of saints, but other Christians kept stealing them, as if it would give them a direct route to heaven, totally oblivious to the point that they had broken at least 4 commandments in taking the damn thing in the first place. The only religion not to treasure relics is paganism, for they revere the sun, the moon, water, the earth, the sky, the things of nature. Now, I don't intend to insult any faith, but let us look at relics from all the faiths with a sensible grip on reality, I hope. Now, on Earth we have 2,886 actual religions that have more than 200,000 people following them. That means the odds that you believe the true faith are 2,886 to 1. That is only true if there really is a religion that is true. Old paganism is the only faith with proof. No gods, no goddesses, only things you can see. The others rely on old stories, all remarkably similar, from as far back as 3,000 years. If I were to tell you the story of a small child who killed a giant with a sling, you would think it was the story of Goliath, the super strong man who pushed over a temple with his bare hands, losing his strength when his hair was cut, Samson and Delilah, feeding 5,000 people, raising the dead, drowning a pursuing enemy by opening a path in the sea, turning water into wine, curing the sick. It's obviously a Christian Bible then, isn't it? Well, no, it isn't, because all of those stories, with different names, were written in Chinese writings 2,400 years before the birth of the Christians' Jesus. Even Noah and his ark were originally on the back of a giant fish, keeping a family and 2 of every creature from the tremendous flood that drowned the earth. Running a parallel, all of the major faiths take a story from these other faiths here and there. This makes it likely that these faiths are just made up and composites. The Bible was written not around the birth of Christ, but up to 600 years later by scholars who created their dream Messiah. You got to remember, before Jesus, there had been 70 previous Messiahs, all capable of all of the miracles of Jesus. Yet the story of Jesus has no proof whatsoever, not one physical bit of truth. The Shroud of Turin was the ultimate proof, the church proclaimed. After all, the image of a dead man captured on a dirty death shroud. It had to be Jesus. After all, he was tall, attractive, he had a beard. They ignored the fact that 95% of the male population of the Middle East looked exactly like that. So they finally agreed to have the shroud carbon dated, discovering it was a fake from medieval times. The church has been desperate to find any proof that countless fakes appeared from time to time, all being totally disproven. In very Catholic Mexico, villagers saw the face of Jesus appear on a bare wall. They proclaimed it a miracle. Within a month, 300,000 pilgrims from all over the world journeyed to this tiny town in Mexico to see the face of their Lord. They told the TV, "You see, we were right all along. The Saviour has sent us a message of his love." After close to 600,000 Christians had seen the wall, photographed it, touched it, prayed to it, it was declared a holy site. It was surrounded with flowers and gifts and candles. Then a tour promoter went to the press, and using digital technology, he recreated the picture. On going online, that image was there for the world to see. So Jesus was real. Well, no. The image was a poster of the face of Willie Nelson. What the people had sworn was the crown of thorns on his head was Willie's bandana. The poster offered tickets to a huge Willie Nelson gig in Mexico City 4 years earlier. It had been washed away, leaving only the basic semblance of a face. So anyway, let's have a pop at the holy relics of various faiths. Hinduism. Most saints that they had were cremated, so there's little or nothing left. However, they do have the completely embalmed body of Swami Ramanuja in a shrine inside the Sri Rangam temple. There were a few others, but they were destroyed following Muslim invasion. Buddhism. Now, if you had the body of the leader of your faith, what would you do with it? Probably place it in a memorial so all could come and revere it. Well, according to the Buddhists themselves, they chopped him up into 8 bits, putting a chunk of him wherever Buddhism thrived in a temple. And there are very few parts of him left. No one knows why, for he was greatly loved, except a tooth of his, held in a temple in Sri Lanka. They refused to have it dated, saying it would be disrespectful to Buddha. Surely pretending someone else's tooth to be his would also be. The Buddhist temple have special areas called stupas, a place for holy things. Nowadays they hold ashes of devout Buddhists. The entire preserved body of Dudjom Rinpoche was kept on display to show a well-preserved Buddhist. The body was also sent on tour to France and finally returned to a stupa in the main temple at Baudhanath, Nepal, in 1988. You can see he's embalmed, yet he's still decaying, and you can see the corpse through a glass cabinet. Relics, say the Buddhists, are proof that Buddha was an ordinary man who showed everyone how to behave. Okay, Christianity. Now prepare yourself for a glut of amazement when you discover what is held by Christian churches believing absolutely that what they've got is real. In Jerusalem, it was said that they owned St. Paul's handkerchiefs, imbued by God with healing powers. They found these handkerchiefs 900 years after he died. Did he write his name on them? In 987, the church declared that every church should hold relics to act as a shrine, so they all started searching the world. Every old jar, jug or eating bowl they discovered became a saint's. In Santiago de Compostela in Spain, they discovered the value of a huge Christian shrine as a bit of a moneymaker. Catholics from across the world pay a fortune to visit the pieces of Apostle James, son of Zebedee. They discovered his body in 830, and they've turned a profit ever since. Once again, they had the body dated, and it was only 300 years old. So about 500 years too young, but they ignore that and they keep the tills turning. In Germany, they have 3 solid gold coffins belonging to the wise men. In Cologne Cathedral, they look beautiful and have 3 old dead people in them. If it really happens to be the Magi, they really got lost after visiting the baby Jesus. In Cyprus, in 3 temples, they have the head of John the Baptist in an old wooden basket. That's 3 heads, all purporting to be the same man. Which one's the real one? Or is it none of them? They all claim it, but it's just 3 old skulls, with no story as to how the Baptist got to Cyprus, long after he died and been buried. In Cypriot temples, they have over 70 pieces of the cross used in the crucifixion. But there's a problem with that too, because the Romans didn't crucify people on crosses. They used a T-shaped one because they were easily made with fewer nails, rather than requiring the cutting of a fancy cross-halving joint. So sadly, the symbol of a cross hanging off necks or standing on altars around the world is merely part of a marketing campaign. It's not based on any truth. The head of St. Thomas Aquinas was taken by monks from the Cistercian Abbey at Fossa Nova. The chains that supposedly held St. Peter are preserved in San Pietro Vincoli in Rome. I suppose it's possible, but how did they get from the Holy Land? The further away you get, the more likely it is of falsehood. The entire body of St. Cecianus is housed in the main altar of St. Raphael's Cathedral in Dubuque, Iowa, USA. This poor lad was martyred during the Diocletian persecution. This certainly didn't happen anywhere close to Iowa. An entire case of bits of the true cross is held beautifully in a glass case in the Dekani Monastery in Serbia. And let's take a look at the greatest Christian relics according to them. 789 churches claim to have nails used on the true cross. 17,900 churches claim to have part of the true cross. It wasn't a cross. 68 churches have the sponge used to wipe blood from Jesus. 54 churches have the lance that cut Jesus. Monza Cathedral holds the Iron Crown of Lombardy, based on the Crown of Thorns. The real Crown of Thorns is held in the British Museum. The real lance is held as part of the crown jewels of the Holy Roman Empire, held in the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. The veil of Veronica is the bit of cloth she used to wipe sweat off the brow of Jesus as he tripped carrying his own cross. It's now on show at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The robe of Jesus is held in Trier Cathedral. The sandals of Jesus were given to Prum Abbey, Germany by Pope Zachary in the 700s. Jesus' nappy and loincloth, the dress of Mary, and the cloth covered in the blood of John the Baptist from his decapitation can be found in Germany in Aachen Cathedral. The girdle, did you know they wore girdles then? The girdle worn by Mary is in the Basilica of Our Lady in Maastricht in the Netherlands. 27 bits of St. Peter are held within the Vatican. The Mandelion is a piece of cloth sent by Jesus to King Abgar of Edessa, who'd sent a message to Jesus to beg him to visit him and cure his leprosy. Instead, Jesus blessed a cloth to wipe his illness from him. He died of leprosy. Relics of Mary and her incorrupt body can be seen at the Church of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in Ermesinde in Portugal. St. Mark's bones can be found in St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. St. Willibrord's body is held in Entermach in Luxembourg. St. Andrew's body parts and relics are held at the Basilica of St. Andrew in Patras in Greece. St. John the Evangelist's body is supposed to be at the Basilica of St. John at Ephesus in Turkey. The Scala Sancta, the Holy Stairs, are the actual flight of stairs claimed to be the ones that Jesus stood on while getting the sentence of execution from Pontius Pilate. 48 relics, mostly body parts of John the Baptist, including his skull, were discovered in a Bulgarian monastery in 2010. They added that the other 367 skulls of his in churches worldwide. So that's 368 skulls belonging to John the Baptist. St. Lambert's skull is in Liège, Belgium. A lump of arm, supposedly a piece of St. Thomas that touched Jesus' side wound after the resurrection, is advertised to be seen in over 70 churches worldwide. The arm of St. George is kept in Lod, in Poland. St. Francis of Assisi is almost complete at the Basilica of St. Francis in Italy. St. Catherine of Siena's head is in the San Domenico Church, Siena. The rest of her body's in a church in Rome. And, in total, an estimated 2.6 million relics of biblical importance, yet the majority from around Jesus' time. A time when Roman and Jewish scholars wrote down everything, yet never mentioned anything from the Bible, until their writings were updated in the 10th century. Okay, let's have a look at Islam, because I know some of you probably thought, oh, you'll miss that out. Well, I haven't. Many historians around the world doubt the existence of the entity described as the Prophet, because there were no relics left from back then. Just another book, another tome, the Quran, to guide and keep control of another sizable population. Now, just because there's an old book doesn't make it untrue. Same for the Talmud of the Bible. The most important relics, about 600 of them, can all be found in the same place, the incredible Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. This includes hair from the Prophet Muhammad and one of his footprints. The sword of Ali, the staff of Moses, Joseph's turban, David's sword, the pot belonging to Abraham, and the forearm and hand of Yahya. You can only see the majority of these during the month of Ramadan. Muslims don't worship the relics. Instead, they read uninterrupted verses from the Quran 24/7. The kurka, a cloak believed to belong to Muhammad, is held at the Central Mosque in Kandahar, Afghanistan. In 1996, the leader of the Afghan Taliban took it out and declared himself commander of the faithful. When it comes to faith, you believe what your heart tells you. Now, if it leads to violence or hatred of any kind, it cannot be a true religion. Many were created to give man the power to control his fellow men. Sadly, still to this day, they lead poor and naive people to slaughter. Even discussing some faiths are enough to get you killed. To tell a joke or draw a cartoon could lead to the massacre of your friends and family. Yet without proof, or direct proof disproving a relic, it's a difficult, dark area, but one we should not be frightened to find out about. Frankly, I think it's a load of old relics. And let's hit Leeds for a very different type of Grizzly story. At a disco on the outskirts of Leeds, there was an amazing story of a girl who was dancing to a record by Tramps called Disco Inferno, when she quite simply burst into flames. There were 60 or 70 others on the dance floor at the time. They thought that a cigarette in someone's hand must have caught her dress and started the fire. Within seconds, the club was cleared, and there, on the dance floor, was a pile of ash. 2 high platform-heeled shoes, her handbag, and the nylon dress that she was wearing. Despite the temperature reaching white heat, her clothes and accessories were not damaged, even though the girl herself was completely obliterated off the face of this earth. Witnesses saw her reaction, and it was totally unbelievable. Frank Simons of Leeds said, "Everybody was having a really good time, and I noticed this girl dancing with her boyfriend. She was wearing one of those light flimsy dresses that when the lights changed, you could almost see through. So like any bloke would do, I kept looking over. She was really pretty, and letting her hair down good and proper. And then I saw what looked like flames from around her waist. It was as if she was exploding. I just stood there with my mouth open. The boyfriend hadn't even noticed, and yet when he looked around, he saw her smiling and laughing. Despite all of the fire, she never cried out and didn't give any cause for us to believe that she felt any pain at all." As in other cases of spontaneous human combustion, the victims felt no pain and die peacefully. The clothes and personal effects remained totally untouched. Now, I know there is an intense fascination from all of us, really, about the wild and woolly West in the United States of America. So I promised that we would finish tonight's Grizzly Trail in that neck of the woods. with a man called Bat Masterson. Bartholomew William Barclay Masterson was born in Quebec, in Canada, to a poor working-class Irish family. Both his grandparents on his father's side were from Scottish ancestry and gave him a love for all things Celtic. He was one of 6 children who were lucky to get fed on a daily basis. Young Bart, who would soon become known as Bat, was desperate to leave home as soon as he could. So in his teens, he and brothers Ed and Jim left his folks' failing farm to hunt buffalo on the Great Plains. And whilst doing this, he got signed up to work on grading track for the Atchison, Topeka and the Santa Fe Railroad. The contractor who hired them, a rat called Ritter, skipped without paying them. It took Masterson a year to catch up with Ritter in Dodge City, Kansas. They just happened to be on the same train, and Ritter had a huge roll of cash, probably from his latest scam. Masterson walked him onto the platform of the station at gunpoint, telling everyone what he had done, and took $300, every single penny that he and his brothers had earned. Then Masterson clipped him with his pistol, knocking him to the ground, and a huge cheer went up from the crowd, who had heard everything. And no one likes a chiseler. Masterson had a habit of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, yet he always seemed to survive. According to Emma, his sister, who was known as Minnie, Bat used to say regularly that he was protected by the Scottish and Irish saints. If it came close to death, he would often thank St. Andrew or St. Patrick. Our Gramps and Granny were both Scottish and had told us all about Edinburgh, Glasgow and the lochs of their homeland. And Bat would say that if ever he was anxious, he would picture a lovely Scottish loch and put himself beside it with his grampy. Only in his imagination was Bat Masterson ever really safe. As children, we both said we would go and live in Ireland or Scotland, for life was so hard. Yet those who travelled to America from Ireland said conditions back there were appalling. So we had decided to move to where Grandpa's came from, a place called Stirling. We would look it up on maps at school and nod to each other. And then life got in our way. So Bat was out buffalo hunting again when he became an involuntary participant in one of the great battles with 3 huge Native American tribes at the famous Battle of Adobe Walls. 3 tribes went on the warpath: the Kiowa, Comanche, and Cheyenne, led by the aggressive war chief Quadapaka. All attacked some hunters on the Texas Panhandle at a village called Adobe Walls. It became a 5-day siege, and other hunters travelling nearby had no choice but to join them after being attacked. And Masterson was one of the 28 men caught up in the battle. Those present spoke well of Masterson, who had taken no sleep at all and was easily the gunman with the greatest number of kills. On one occasion, he was shooting at Comanche warriors trying to break in on horseback, whilst the Kiowa tried to sneak behind them. Single-handedly, Masterson held them back, leaving 17 of them dead. After 5 long days and nights of non-stop fighting, over 70 Native American Indians had died, and only 4 of the hunters. One of them had been loading his gun when it went off, almost blowing away his entire face. The chief eventually had had enough of fighting without success. so simply led his men away. But Masterson's legend was growing, and his performance in Adobe Walls led to him signing up as an Army scout with Colonel Nelson Miles. His detachment had been assembled to pursue the Apache and Comanche across the Cherokee Strip into Texas and across into Mexico. His very first adventure was to try and recover 4 little girls abducted by a group of Cheyenne dog soldiers. Their parents had been traveling towards Colorado in a major migration, and outside of Ellis in Kansas, their brother and 2 older sisters had been killed and scalped. Masterson picked up their trail and followed it to a camp on the Brazos, guarded by 3 braves, whilst the others slept. The troops crept up on the guards whilst Masterson and 3 other scouts darted into the camp. All hell let loose, and he was firing in all directions, whilst the others got the children out of there, all alive and all unhurt. Whilst returning to the fort, Colonel Miles was said to have suggested that he had the type of terrifying calm that lawmen needed in the wild towns of today. He didn't really give this much thought until he was in Sweetwater, Texas, and needed the sheriff. And the story goes that Bat Masterson was up in a saloon room with one of its girls when suddenly a bullet came through the floor and sliced a groove in her buttock. Masterson walked down to see what was going on, and there in the main saloon was a soldier, Corporal Melvin A. King, whose real name was Anthony Cook, who promptly attacked him. 8 bullets were fired, and when the smoke cleared, King had 3 bullets in him and would die on the surgeon's table. Masterson had a bullet that needed cutting out of his pelvis, but he made a full recovery. And this made him believe that he needed to be a lawman, to protect himself at very least. Yet his very next dealing with the law was as a villain rather than a hero. He was friendly with a Scotsman, Robert Gilmore, who was known as Bobby Gill. His family was from just outside Stirling, and they regularly talked together about what it was like there. Once again, musing of moving there sometime. The 315-pound Marshal Lawrence Digger was about to put cuffs on Gilmore when Masterson wrapped his arms around the lawman, allowing his friend to flee. The deputies pistol-whipped Masterson, and he was fined for disturbing the peace. And he had to pay $25 to avoid being put in a jail cell. Ironically, Marshal Digger applied for a job as sheriff of Ford County, only to be beaten by Bat Masterson. His brother Ed would replace Digger as marshal, giving the brothers the type of control needed to protect a violent county. In February 1878, the brothers captured 2 notorious and murdering outlaws, Dave Rudabaugh and Ed West, who had tried to rob a train. The other 2 gang members were caught by Ed, and their teamwork looked as if it had a real chance of changing things for the better. That idea ended swiftly when a cowboy, Jack Wagner, challenged him, mortally wounding him, and just as he was trying to escape, Bat Masterson walked into the street. He fired 3 shots, 2 hitting and killing Alf Walker, who was holding a pistol, and the 3rd thumping into Wagner's chest. Wagner would survive and was taken back to Texas. This was a time when, if you had money, you could do pretty much anything. However, people like Masterson were about to change that. A favourite actress of the time was Dora Hand, her stage name Fanny Keenan. She was shot and killed by James Kennedy, the son of a cattle baron, Milton Kennedy. The father offered a fortune to the posse to say it was an accident when the young cowboy had tried to rape her, and because she had scratched his face, he'd shot and killed her. But this was a real posse, made up of Bat Masterson, Bill Tillman, and Wyatt Earp. They caught him within 24 hours, Masterson shooting him in his gun arm, whilst the others shot his horse. The Santa Fe Railway asked Masterson to help because another railroad, the Denver and Rio Grande, were shooting their men to try and win the contract for themselves. Masterson managed to gather some real gun talent, including Ben Thompson, Mysterious Dave Mather, John Joshua Webb, and a man called Doc Holliday. The shootings continued on both sides, and Masterson tried to look after his county as well as keeping the railroad happy. Masterson was in his roundhouse some years later and had to surrender, allowing the whole matter to be settled in court. By this time, Masterson was living with Annie LaDue, a beautiful 19-year-old that he listed as his concubine. City Marshal James Masterson was living with 16-year-old Minnie Roberts. His friend Ben Thompson asked if Bat could travel to Ogallala, Nebraska, where his other troublesome brother Billy Thompson was in trouble. In a gunfight, he'd managed to shoot the thumb off a man called Tucker, who even with only one thumb had wounded him back. And even though it seemed tit for tat, Tucker was demanding a hanging for his missing digit. Bat would sneak him out of town with the help of Buffalo Bill Cody. No gun hand in their right mind would challenge that pairing. Cody provided them with safe refuge at his ranch until Billy had recovered from his gunshot wound. Bat Masterson had teamed up with Wyatt Earp in Tombstone, clearing out the vicious gunmen who thought that they owned it. And after the deaths of around 40 men, Masterson decided that he fancied a break from all of the pressure, so he became a faro dealer in a major saloon. Taking a break to help Wyatt if things looked difficult, he spent a few weeks away, and this allowed A.J. Peacock, his boss, to hire his drunk of a brother, despite him being a cheat. On Bat's return to Dodge City, Peacock and his brother, Updegraff, waited behind the saloon for him to arrive on his horse. And as soon as he was heading into the Long Branch saloon, shots rang out. Updegraff caught a bullet in his spleen, but would recover. But the townsfolk were sick of gunfire, and they prosecuted Masterson, fining him $8,000. The city elders were still outraged and wanted warrants issued against them. But because of their valiant battles against serious outlaws, they were allowed to leave. Bat Masterson then popped up in Trinidad, Colorado, where he was named City Marshal. And within 2 days, Wyatt Earp asked for his help to stop Doc Holliday from being extradited from Colorado to Arizona. And once he had managed to do this, courtesy of direct intervention of the governor, his future as a peace officer in Colorado was over. The press believed Holliday should have faced trial for a shooting there and printed awful things about Masterson, many of them not true, but the damage had already been done. Bat's old adversary, Marshal Degger, had run his friend Luke Short out of Dodge City, so Masterson gathered a group of peace officers, including Wyatt Earp, for what would be named as the Dodge City War. One famous picture shows the group that they called the Dodge City Peace Commission, featuring William H. Harris, Luke Short, Bat Masterson, William F. Petillon, Charlie Bassett, Wyatt Earp, Frank McLean, and Neil Brown. And they managed to purge the town of Dega and 11 unelected deputies. Many believed they protected the interests of all of the rich cattlemen. Heartily sick of killing, Masterson tried becoming a journalist in Dodge City. His career would end within the week after his newspaper, Vox Populi, folded due to lack of sales. So Masterson moved on to Denver, where he fell for the wife of a stage performer called Lou Spencer. And rather than being discreet, he would take her, Nellie, to see Spencer's shows while she sat on his lap. On seeing this, Spencer cut his act short and came down to confront the tall, powerful-looking Masterson, and Bat pistol-whipped him, knocking him down onto the saloon floor. 3 days later, Nellie sued for divorce, after both of her suitors were arrested and fined. Bat Masterson was a bit of a ladies' man, marrying an Indian club singer called Emma Moulton. He worked at the Palace Variety Theatre on the faro tables, and to protect the owner was his secondary occupation. He just wasn't happy. So then he thought he would turn his attention to prize fighting. He trained hard, he had a number of fights. He was known by the big boxing names of the day, like John L. Sullivan, Gentleman Jim Corbett, Jack Johnson, and Jack Dempsey. And as he tired of the ring, he sought excitement, heading out to the silver boom town of Creede in Colorado. And no sooner had he arrived there that somebody burned the whole place to the ground. So in 1895 he thought he could become the bodyguard for one of the richest men around, and was swiftly hired by millionaire George Gould. He wrote to the family about his incredible fishing trips that he'd shared with the Goulds on their yacht. He even proclaimed that he was going to stay in New York indefinitely, unless I could persuade them to sail with me to Scotland. One of his friends realised Bat was in his element, saying he has fallen into a dead easy game. And yet again, Bat couldn't settle. He headed out to Arapaho country to become a deputy sheriff. And during the election of the new sheriff, there was a scuffle. Masterson reached for a gun and it went off and shattered C.C. Louderbar's wrist. So off he went again, back to host boxing matches all over Colorado. Briefly, he worked as a sports editor for a local paper. Some say that he became a bit of a drunk and was forced out of Denver. So he travelled back up to New York again and managed to get a column in a newspaper called Masterson's Views on Timely Topics. Yet it was when he began talking about the Wild West and his days alongside the national names that his writing career took off. The management turned against him, as it appeared that he supported violence, so he floundered a bit, picking up the odd job as the timekeeper for fights. However, it was his old editor who introduced Bat to President Theodore Roosevelt, and a long-term friendship was forged. He even gave him a job as deputy marshal for New York, warning him not to play faro or to organise boxing whilst in the job, as it would open him up to criticism. So, after another 4 years in 1909, he was keen to flit away to do something else again. No offers to be a peace officer, but the boxing world still loved him, so for the latter 12 years of his life, he covered major fights for the New York Morning Telegraph. In fact, he was writing his column when a massive heart attack took his life. There were 500 people at his funeral, including Damon Runyon, who had befriended him, and in his eulogy said, "He was 100% 22-carat real man. Bat was a good hater and a wonderful friend. He was always stretching out of his hand for a down-and-outer. He had a huge and great sense of humour and had a veritable fund of reminiscences, and was one of the more entertaining companions that we have known. There are too few men like Bat Masterson, and his death is a genuine loss." His sister, Minnie's daughter, attended the funeral and put a tartan scarf into his grave. It was the nearest thing she could do to get him to his beloved Scotland. Masterson is buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, and his epitaph simply says, "Loved by everyone." And yet, something bizarre occurred outside the Woodlawn Cemetery in 2018. A local businessman called MacLeod died, and his wife hired a Scottish band to play in the church and outside. When a photograph of the mourners was published, in the back row was a dark-skinned man wearing a cowboy hat with a serious, old-fashioned moustache. Jeanette MacLeod was told it could be a ghost, for she had no clue who it was. And when the local librarian saw it, he thought immediately it was Bat Masterson, because of his great love of all things Scottish. And on digging a few books with his photograph on it, he popped along to see Mrs. MacLeod, and the man in the back row looked identical to Bat Masterson. It made the local paper, and hundreds commented on it, including the two people stood next to him in the photo, saying, "He appeared as solid as you or I." That was Edward Thorpe, a family friend of the MacLeods. I thought his outfit was a little strange for a funeral, but this is New York. So there we have our Grizzly tales for tonight. Hope you've enjoyed them. Vast mixture as always. And don't forget, if you'd like any more, go to robsonsworld.com, where there's a whole batch more waiting for you. I hope you find something that you enjoy. Check the galleries as well as the timeline for the history of me and the show, and to see some of the ghostly pics. It's well worth a visit, so make sure you do. And until next time, from me, Alan Robson, good night, God bless you, and I wish you well.